Welcome back to the Rod Chapel Show. As you know, we've been talking about the municipal court. Some of the issues that affect us here in Jefferson City also affect the state and the nation and are very important. And so we have an opportunity to review that with a person who is well suited for the information that we need, Judge Cotton Walker. Judge Walker?
Thank you. You mentioned Jeff City Municipal Court. I actually served as the prosecutor back in the 90s before I became the judge eventually an elected capacity. So I have kind of seen both sides of it, and that's important. In Jefferson City, we have a part-time prosecutor and a part-time judge. You mentioned earlier that I have a full-time civil law practice, and I do in addition to serving as elected judge. Right. That's not unique to municipal courts in the state of Missouri, though the caseload is sometimes great. Both the prosecutor and the judge serve as a part-time capacity. In Jefferson City, we have court 1 day a week. Okay. It's every Wednesday. In fact, literally in 2015, I believe we will have 2 Wednesdays only, maybe 3 where we don't have court because they fall on a holiday. I think Veterans Day this year is a Wednesday. Okay. And then there's maybe one other holiday, but otherwise it's every Wednesday, and we have dockets starting at 8:30 in the morning. If you get a traffic summons or a summons from the city, you're typically it's going to tell you to be there at 8:30 on a Wednesday, and within a few weeks of your summons date. Okay. The arraignment docket starts first. That rolls straight in the morning into the show cause or the payment docket people talk about. And then the afternoon dockets, starting at 1:30, are the trial dockets, except for once a month. When attorneys such as yourself come on law day, that's 1 Wednesday per month. And that's an opportunity to have motion hearings, certainly plea arrangements or things that the defendant's attorney has worked out with the prosecuting attorney, reviewing evidence, arguing motions to suppress, setting cases for trial. That's the law day once a month. Okay. And every one of those dockets is very full. Occasionally a trial docket ends up not having many cases go to trial, and a trial in municipal court sometimes is all of about 10 or 15 minutes. If it's a traffic matter and the only witness for the city is the officer who witnessed the offense or alleged offense, and the defendant who says, I didn't do it that way, it doesn't take long to get to that. Right. But that's the typical municipal court Wednesday, and then at 4 o'clock or thereabout, most Wednesdays, then I do a video docket, a jail docket through TV. Those defendants who are in jail, instead of bringing them into the court, as you see on TV or sometimes in other courts, in their jumpsuits or whatever, they appear by video, and we do that late in the afternoon on Wednesdays as well. So those are the dockets that we handle every single Wednesday of the year. Wow. Wow. So Wednesdays are busy. Wednesdays are busy, yes, sir.
About how many cases would you say that are?
The municipal court handles about 11,000 cases per year. 11,000. Now, that is the total number of summons, not total number of people who actually appear in court, because certainly about half of those, the people are going to pay out of court. Right. They're going to send in their fine and be done, or pay their fine and be done.
And that's an important point.
Yes.
So if, and there might be circumstances where people would or would not want to do this, but let's go back to our traffic violation. If you get a standard speeding ticket, somebody might just want to pay the ticket, and they could mail that in or pay online and never come to court and be done.
Yep. And that is in that 11,000 count. So I don't personally see 11,000 defendants.
That's probably good, though.
Yes, absolutely. And certainly some defendants get multiple offenses. It is important to know that if you're going to mail in your fine, or if you appear and plead guilty, mailing in your fine is pleading guilty. Typically they ask you to sign the ticket and mail in your fine if you're going to do it that way. But there are, and judges have to be mindful of this, there are collateral consequences of that. The biggest example that we deal with in municipal court, and that your example would give, is you're going to have points assessed on your driver's license. Right. And so a speeding ticket in municipal court is a 2-point offense, typically, and There are other offenses that can be more points, but and if the Department of Revenue, with whom you get your right to have a driver's license, can suspend your license if you accumulate too many points, which typically off the cuff is 8 points in an 18-month period. And so, one speeding ticket, it's not going to affect your ability to drive legally, but you have to be mindful that there are consequences of just mailing in your fine. A no insurance ticket is a 4-point offense.
Is that right?
That's important.
Well, and talking about insurance, also paying for a ticket could result in an increase in a person's insurance, right?
That's true. That's true. If especially in an accident situation, or if you don't think you're guilty, know that there are consequences of pleading guilty just to be done with it.
Right.
So,
right.
Yes,
right.
sir.
Could pay something now and end up paying a lot later too. But.
Yeah, and so that's the process, and if you pay it ahead of time, then you don't go on to that show cause docket.
Okay.
The payment docket, but if you plead guilty or you're found guilty and you're given that time to pay, then you have to appear in front of us on a show cause docket, and that sometimes leads to some interesting stories or circumstances, which
I imagine that with the time that you've been on the bench, you've got a few.
There are a few. One example would be a young lady who had traffic offenses, but had a couple $100 in fines, and so I said, well, if you can't pay them today, you can appear 30 days from now and pay them on that court date, or pay them before that court date.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, I think earlier, as long as you pay at least $50, which is not written anywhere, but then I deem that you're trying, and I'll give you additional time to pay your fines. Well,
right.
So one particular young lady came back to that payment docket or show cause docket and said she didn't have any money. And I said, why didn't you have any money to pay your fine? And she started with, well, Judge, there was this guy. I immediately cut her off, and I said to her, there is nothing you could say next that's going to help you in this hearing.
Right.
So I'll give you another date in a couple of weeks, and you need to pay your fines. Whatever went on with the guy is not relevant to you being ability to pay the fine.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. On that $50 example, I actually had one young man who expressed an inability to pay over a couple of months, and about the third time when I said, well, look, you owe whatever, $300, and you've paid zero for 90 days. So next time, I think you could find $50 from your employment or some legal means. You need to pay the $50. And the next time he walked up, head all down, and I thought he was going to tell me he didn't have the $50, and though I believed he could have paid it by then.
Right.
And he showed with $50 to go pay to the clerk. And I said, well, that's great. I'm glad you made your payment. And he goes, you want to know how I got the $50, Judge? I was a little hesitant.
Right.
But I said, okay. And he said, I asked 10 people to loan me $5 each. So he made his $50 payment. That was
and avoided a payday loan.
Exactly. I guess that's right. That's a time I mentioned not lying to the court. Those show cause dockets are definitely a time to not lie to the court. People make excuses about all sorts of things, which are typically not that we go investigate particularly. We don't have that staff or time, but you usually trip themselves up at those show cause hearing dates, and we, it's a community court, it's a municipal court, so we try to have this mutual respect that they know that they were found guilty or pled guilty, and they're going to pay their fines. And sometimes I think that's working in a funny way too. I'll be at the grocery store or at a basketball game or last summer in the 4th of July parade, and people will say, hey, that's my judge over there. And they'll call me out or they'll wave at me, and that's it's sort of funny and embarrassing in a way, but that's the relationship that you should have with your citizens, whether I'm their judge as the defendant, or maybe they were a victim.
Sure.
And so that's the community we live in. And when we were in the parade, I was driving a military Jeep with my wife and kids. My teenage daughter didn't think that was very funny, but otherwise it was fine. One other interesting case from court came about when a young lady was on trial for something. I don't recall the exact circumstance, but one of her witnesses was her boyfriend.
Okay.
And so she called in her defense her boyfriend. She asked him a few questions. They were appropriate and related to the offense. And then she thought, while I've got him under oath,
No,
I'm going to ask him some other questions.
No, she didn't.
And she started down this path. But at first, the prosecutor and I were not sure, is this related to the defense? And we quickly determined it was just her opportunity while her boyfriend was under oath to ask some questions that she wanted to know. So we kind of had to stop that pretty quickly and get back to the point.
That's right. That's right.
But again, people want to have their day in court, and you get people from different backgrounds and socioeconomic status and health and even mental health issues, and you have to treat them with respect and that same seriousness as all courts, even if somebody really has a special circumstance, like a case that I had where an attorney had his defendant in and with a straight face indicated to me that his client was remorseful for a shoplifting offense.
Okay.
Two shoplifting offenses in a short period, and this was a middle-aged woman. Would not have thought of them as somebody who would likely do that, but he explained that she had a special circumstance because she thought she would get away with it because she thought she was invisible. And it's not funny in the sense of if that person has a mental health issue, and so you have to treat even those circumstances with the respect and yet also the seriousness that she knew at least at some point she committed an offense she shouldn't have, and therefore she was subject to sentencing in the court. But it's sort of funny to think of somebody pleading a case that way, but at the same time it points out the things that we have to deal with in a municipal court.
Well, that's the truth. That's the truth. And it's that kind of attitude that I think it's important for, as an elected official, as an arm of local government, to be able to interact with people in an appropriate way.
Yes, sir.
Do you have time if we come back one more time
Yes,
to
sir.
talk about maybe some things that we could see changing statewide or nationally as we examine municipal courts more closely?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks for joining us on the Rod Chappell Show. We have Judge Cotton Walker, for one more segment on things that we might expect to change in certain national or local or even statewide views of municipal courts. Thank you.
HILC In-Home Care provides personal care attendant services to qualified disabled and elderly residents of Cole and Osage counties. These services make it possible for many people to continue to live independently in their own homes. For more information on HILC's Medicaid, respite, youth, private pay, and private insurance programs, call HILC In-Home Care toll-free at 1-866-231-6652.
The Boys and Girls Club works to enable all youth, especially those who need us most, to reach their full potential as productive, responsible, and caring adults.
Success is within the reach of every young person who enters our doors. We work with youth to ensure they achieve academic success, develop good character and citizenship, and have a healthy lifestyle.
Boys and Girls Club of the capital city. While some doors just open, our doors transform. Great futures start here.
Find us online at bgcjc.com and like us on Facebook. We're proud to be a United Way partner agency.
Hi, I'm Kurt Probst, and I am a big brother. Missouri Valley Big Brothers Big Sisters desperately need your help. Right now, more than 50 children are waiting for someone to spend time with them, waiting for a mentor. By spending time with a child, you can change their future and improve their chances of succeeding in life. All it takes is 1 hour a week. Call Missouri Valley Big Brothers Big Sisters at 634-3290 to get involved today. We are proud to be a United Way partner agency.
Welcome back to the Rod Chappell Show. As you know, we've got a distinguished jurist with us, Judge Cotton Walker, And one of the things that I can say about Jefferson City is that our local officials really take to heart being accessible to the public, sharing the message and the vision of local government, and doing it in a way that makes everyone feel counted. So Judge, with that, thanks for being here. I know that there's been a lot of controversy that's come up about the municipal court system, not necessarily ours, but statewide, as it relates to Ferguson. Sure. Not only being a long tenure on the bench, but also serving the positions that you sit with in the statewide organization. Can you tell us how some of those have come to the surface, and maybe we can talk about some of the reforms we might see and why we might see them some places and not others?
Oh yeah, well, the events in Ferguson, starting with the Michael Brown shooting, which that in itself didn't directly relate to municipal courts, but the attention that it drew to that community and Missouri, coupled with a group in St. Louis called the Arch City Defenders was already doing, if you will, an investigative piece, and they prepared a white paper that I know you and I have discussed a little bit, and many people have seen. In fact, that white paper and some of their ideas were this fall shared in op pieces in Washington Post and obviously St. Louis Post-Dispatch and New York Times, which talked about whether municipal courts or the court system in general has problems with not being avenues of justice for everyone equally. That is, people of race, race issues or poverty, and on the poverty issue, specifically those municipal courts in the St. Louis area were questioned whether they were just acting as revenue centers. In fact, the Arch City Defenders were already investigating that before Michael Brown happened, and it just kind of drew more attention to it nationally because of that unfortunate circumstance. And they make some good points that the municipalities, for example, along I-70, that have speed traps, and they just kick out ticket after ticket after ticket to fund municipal law enforcement or other projects or grand city halls or salaries or something is not an appropriate, if you will, dispensation of justice. And so that's certainly something that our state judiciary, our Municipal Circuit Judges Association, and some other groups, including there was a St. Louis Municipal Courts Improvement Committee that looked at some of these problems from the angle of this access to courts, literal access. I mean, some of those courts were restricting people from coming in what should be an open court. Really? They did it on the auspices sometimes of security concerns, but they were exempting citizens from attending court. Well, that flies in the face of the whole sense of justice, and as you know, in the practice of law, judges have to avoid the appearance that's in the judicial canons, appearance of impropriety or unfairness. And when you don't let the court be open, you're failing at step one.
That's right, an artificially closed proceeding.
Exactly. Wow. And on the poverty line, the idea that somebody in the Arch City Defenders piece, there are some issues that and ideas that I don't necessarily agree with, because most of the specific examples that they gave started with somebody not appearing in court.
Okay.
Now, they may have not appeared in court for a good reason, or for a lack of knowledge, because Rod Chappell Show wasn't running in St. Louis all the time, but that they would be arrested if they didn't have money to pay their fines. And so they chose not to go to court. Well, Arch City Defenders kind of glosses over that, but then the other elements of those things that may be necessary to reform so that everyone has the same access to justice in Missouri and nationwide, as you point out, are right on. And that's something that those committees, our Municipal Judges Association, have talked about one of the things we've talked about is in our organization, the Municipal and Associate Circuit Judges Association, is whether we should be on the front lines of educating. Should we do a PSA? Should we do public service announcements? And that's an uncomfortable position for a judge to be in, because judges, can't take a political stance or be seen as having any position because of the duty to be impartial and fair on each individual issue. But I think we need to, the judiciary generally, and we have a great leader in our Supreme Court judge in our state of the judiciary pointed out that we do need to let citizens know that Missouri courts allow that equal access to justice. So there are some things that that can be done. So.
And it's impressive that Judge Russell would include that in her state of the judiciary.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, she gave examples. She talked about Ferguson, and she talked about the efforts of some of those who are focusing on the St. Louis courts, and the question about, is that something that's unique to North St. Louis, or is it statewide, or certainly nationwide, and that we need to have that conversation, and we need to be open to reforms if necessary. One of the other things that's happening is the courts are getting legislative attention. The courts are obviously there to interpret the laws that are passed by the legislature or the individual city councils. And this year at the legislative level, they're doing everything from looking at, doing away with all municipal courts, which would be a physical note nightmare, but nonetheless, to things such as the Max Creek law that sometimes hits the paper. And you know about Max Creek story from a decade or more ago, where a small community down near the lake was a huge speed trap and collecting way more revenue than they ever needed for their government. And so there was a state law passed, again, more than a decade ago, that said that each municipality can only have a certain percentage of their revenue be from fines and costs, whether it's from speeding tickets or any violation. And they set that at the time at 30% of your total revenue.
Okay.
And the state auditor's office is charged with making sure that all municipalities stay within that level. This year, there's proposals to take that level down to 10%. And some of those cities, like in the our city defenders, like Bell Ridge and Florissant and Ferguson, well, they do fund important things like law enforcement and community development from sometimes their court revenue, if you will. But the court's not to be a revenue center. So they've talked about lowering that to 10% in some proposed legislation this year. And I know the legislature is giving that a lot of attention, and other ideas to reform municipal courts to make sure that they're operating in that fair way. Jeff City, by the way, Jefferson City Municipal Court, while we do have an exceptional caseload, appropriate for a city our size, our court revenue is about 5% of Jeff City's full budget. So we're not a Max Creek situation. And sometimes people get upset because they get their a parking ticket or a speeding ticket or a second speeding ticket or something. But our court is not acting as a revenue source or center. It's just trying to keep the rule of law.
Right. No, that's well, and an interesting thing for me is how in some communities you have, and whether it's the peace officers or the courts or some other branch of local government who appear to be completely oblivious to the citizenry and unresponsive to those folks. And then in other parts of the country or the state, and in terms of Missouri, you've got folks that are a lot more responsive, that actually make a point to be proactive and engage with folks.
Sure. Well, nobody's perfect. No court is perfect. We've since I was elected and our prosecutor Brian Stumpy, we've tried a few different approaches with our clerks and with the city administration knowledge. different court times. We used to have night court. You know, that was a change that may have affected some. Okay. But all related to, you know, the idea that, all related to what's best for the court and for justice. Right. The idea that we have those citizens fill out a written application regarding, you know, or an affidavit regarding their ability to pay for an attorney or pay for their fines once they're found guilty. You know, through this process and this microscope on our municipal courts in Missouri, we've learned that not all courts have taken that to that level. Certainly some don't do it in writing. Some don't really seem to give it that care that is necessary for justice. You know, in Jefferson City we try. Right. I know that the example back of the open courts, one of the proposals of that committee in St. Louis, the St. Louis Municipal Court Improvement Committee, was to suggest in their circuit a specific rule of court about when courts open and what have you, and they used the exact language that we use. That scrolls on our screen. Oh, wow. For example, bringing children to the courtroom, or bringing relatives. Sure. Some of the wording is, court's not a great place for children, right? But it's an open court, right? And you know, and certainly our bailiff, if they're disruptive, will have to deal with. But so those little things that have to do with the appearance of justice are important. You know, the other thing in Jefferson City that may or may not be happening in all those communities is there are other local efforts that you're probably aware of to have discussions about this. We have faith-based initiatives. That's exactly right. Quinn Chapel has this year-long conversation on race that's very important, and it does relate to our community and the perception even in our court system. It's true. Those things are extremely important. And I believe that those are going on in Ferguson and some of the surrounding areas now. Right. They maybe should have gone on before last August events. That's right. And it's something that we need to be mindful of. So. Well, and you know, I think that I can hopefully sum this up in an appropriate way that at least for me is true. I think that when you've got people who are committed to their service, committed through their service to the people, and that engage with the communities that they're related to, you're going to have better government. And that's an opportunity not only for public service, but also for us as citizens to be engaged with our local elected officials. Thank you for being here today. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. My pleasure. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks for joining us on the Rod Chappell Show. Please look for us. We'll have some more segments related to legal issues that affect real people.